Hello and welcome to today's video. So this is our second look at viewers' collections, and I'm quite privileged today because we've got a couple of publishers' collections in here as well. So they are truly fascinating. I've got some fantastic backstories to the collections as well. Now, the first video of these has proved very, very popular, so I do encourage you to just email me and send in pictures or video of your own collection. The next one I'm going to be doing, because today's are all fairly long, I'm going to be doing some short sharp collections, so ones which are going to take just maybe 2 or 3 minutes to go through. So do please don't be discouraged by the size of your collection. Just send in what you've got, and I'll try and do a quick fire, maybe 10 to 15 collections next month. Anyway, back to today. It's some fantastic stuff to look at, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. So sit back, relax, and let's get to it. So our first collection today is by Deis. Now, Bob's a publisher and I've known him for a couple of years now. And Bob sent a few photos and quite a comprehensive little biography, so let's get into it. It says, "Hi Jules, I've attached some photos of my messy shelves, full of men's adventure magazines." That's the MAMs. Now, the copies that are out on shelves take up all the walls in my office and office closet, plus a wall and closet in my bedroom. There are many stored boxes of MAM issues elsewhere in our house and garage, not shown in the photos. Here's some background on how I got into collecting, writing about and publishing books about MAMs. So about 15 years ago, I was listening to a CD reissue of Frank Zappa's Weasels Ripped My Flesh album. It sparked a flashback to the day in 1970 when I bought the album on vinyl. I remember thinking the LP's gonzo title was a hoot, and I loved the bizarre cover art, a retro-style cartoon painted by artist Neon Park. It shows a vacantly smiling square guy shaving with electric weasel. The weasel's teeth are making a bloody gouge in his cheek. Wild. As I listened to the CD, I decided to search the web to find some background on the original album. What I found caused a domino effect that sucked me into the realm of men's adventure magazines published in the 50s, 60s and early 70s, sometimes called men's pulp magazines or men's sweat magazines. From various websites I learned that Zappa got his album title from a story in one of those magazines, the September 1956 issue of Man's Life. I found a picture of that issue's cover online. It features an incredible painted illustration that's even more bizarre than the album artwork. The Man's Life cover painting, which I later learned was done by one of the great illustration artists who worked for the genre, Will Hussey, shows a bare-chested, bleeding, manly man, waist deep in churning water, desperately fighting off a horde of attacking weasels. And there in the lower right-hand corner is the classic headline for the cover story inside, "Weasels Ripped My Flesh." I tracked down a copy of the magazine and read it. It was not what I expected. It's a dark, noirish story that is amazingly wild and cool, as Will Hussey's cover story. I was hooked. I started buying more and more men's adventure magazines through eBay and other sources. I now have more than 6,000 issues, which I estimate to be nearly 95% of those that were published. I think it's one of the largest, maybe the largest collection of men's adventure magazine issues in the world. To learn more about the MAMs, I read what were the two most authoritative books about the genre at the time. It's a Man's World, Men's Adventure Magazines, The Post-War Pulps by Adam Parfrey, and Men's Adventure Magazines in Post-War America by Max Allan Collins and George Hagener, which features the awesome collection of magazines and original artwork owned by Rich Oberg. I also started searching for blogs or websites dedicated to discussion of the men's post-war pulp magazines. I did find scattered posts about men's adventure magazines on a number of blogs and websites. I found men's adventure magazine cover scans on various types of sites. I also found blogs that focus on the history of related but different genres, like the earlier pulp fiction magazines that ran from the 1920s to the early 1950s, and the men's girly or bachelor magazines of the 50s, 60s and 70s. What I didn't find was what I really wanted, a site that focuses on the post-World War II men's adventure magazines and the various aspects of the genre, the covers, the artists, writers, the pulp fiction style stories and true non-fiction articles, which tend to severely bend the meaning of the word true, the vintage ads and other interesting and amusing things that those magazines tell us about the men, women, history and culture of the 50s, 60s and 70s. I couldn't find any site like that, so in 2009 I decided to create one myself, World Wide Web, menspulpmags.com. A couple of years later, I created the Men's Adventure Magazine Facebook group, which now has thousands of members from around the world. In 2012, I decided to put together a book collecting some of my favourite Men's Adventure Magazine stories. It was published in January 2013 by New Texture Books. Naturally, I titled it Weasels Rip My Flesh. My co-editors on the Weasels anthology were writer-publisher Wyatt Doyle, head of New Texture, and writer-musician Josh Allen Friedman, a friend of Wyatt's whose father, Bruce J. Friedman, was an editor of Men's Adventure magazines before he became a world-famous novelist, playwright and screenwriter. That book includes the original man's life story about flesh-ripping weasels and many other wild stories by notable writers who once wrote for Men's Adventure magazines, such as Bruce, Lawrence Block, Jane Dollinger, Harlan Ellison, Walter Kalin, Ken Crippen, Robert Silverberg and Walter Wagger. There's also an interview Josh did with Mario Puzo, author of The Godfather, about his time as a writer and associate editor for Men's Adventure magazines. Our Weasels Rip My Flesh anthology is illustrated with the covers and interior artwork that were used for the stories. Its success has led Wyatt Doyle and I to publish a series of books that feature classic Men's Adventure magazine stories and artwork. There are currently 14 books in the series, which we call the Men's Adventure Library, and more coming. All but 2 are heavily illustrated in full colour and available via Amazon worldwide. In January of 2021, I started another Men's Adventure magazine-related publishing venture with Bill Cunningham, head of Pulp 2.0 Press. It's a lushly illustrated full-colour magazine titled The Men's Adventure Quarterly, based on our plan to publish 4 issues per year. The first 3 issues are now available via Amazon worldwide. So thanks to Frank Zappa for getting me hooked on Men's Adventure magazines. I'm having a great time collecting, writing and publishing books about them. And thanks to you, sir, for showing your gracious support for my labours of love by featuring them in your videos. So collection number 10 is Drew, aka the Penguin Chap. So Drew is a bit of a penguin book dealer as well as a collector. So Drew says, I live in Chosley, where Agatha Christie used to worship and where she now lies with her husband, Max Mallowan. I caught the bug for collecting penguins not long after moving here at a nearby charity sale that was held every month. Though sadly ended now, the sale was the place to find everything you would ever need for the home and garden. The book section was particularly bountiful. One could acquire 5 penguins or puffins for just £2. Not long after discovering the sale, I set myself the goal of collecting the first 100 penguins in the main series, and somewhere down the line I added the goal to collect the first 100 puffins and the entire King Penguin series. Add to that a pre-existing love for the work of J.R.R. Tolkien, and you're talking a reasonable amount of shelf space. The Penguin main series and Tolkien books are stored in my great-aunt's 1930s stacking bookcase. The King Penguins and Puffins are stored in cabinets within a 1930s writing bureau. Drew says he recently acquired the Holy Grail of number 6, The Mysterious Affair at Styles by Agatha Christie, as a Penguin first edition. On the Puffins, he says he's got about a dozen more to complete his goal of the first 100, and of the King Penguins, he's got about a dozen more to complete the series. And if you are interested in vintage penguin books, do check out Drew's site, The Penguin Chap. It's fantastic. So next, another publisher, fanzine editor Justin Marriott. So Justin says he's been collecting paperbacks for just over 2 decades. I have always been a collector, starting with comics and then moving on to monster mags and horror film fanzines. I ditched all my horror zines with the advent of the internet in the late 90s, as I took the view that all the information was freely available online. The paperback collecting bug bit when I stumbled across a few very worn and dog-eared copies of New English Library Hell's Angel paperbacks in a charity shop around the same time. They took me on a very pleasant trip of nostalgia back to my teenage years, so I replaced horror fanzine collecting with paperback collecting, initially focusing on the New English Library. As I was not married at the time, I had the funds and time to spend my weekends driving to used bookshops, so I was able to amass a lot of paperbacks very quickly and at a sensible price. I was also fortunate enough to be travelling to the US several times a year and would typically bring back a couple of hundred paperback books each visit. My collecting tastes have changed over the years, and I regret the many times I walked past paperbacks in the 90s which I would love to find now, and there are many stores that I wish I could visit again with my new wants. but are now closed, such as the Book Baron in Anaheim, California, which was breathtaking in both size and stock, or KO Books in San Francisco, which was the nearest thing to cool any paperback fanatic can get. It's true, I was in San Francisco 2 years ago, and the shop was there, it had stock in, but you just couldn't raise the owner or get in, and we were there for a week, so shame that one's gone. Now, the shelfies were taken in my garage where I store most of my books. They were not staged or tidied, so are undoubtedly pretty random for the most part. I tend to file by genre and then publisher, with most of my collection devoted to horror and men's adventure, although I have a solid collection of Western paperbacks such as Edge and Steel. Sleaze collecting has never especially grabbed me, although I did try it for a few years. I only have a few left in that genre on my shelves, mainly the outrageously packaged titles from Chicago-based novel books. I have virtually stopped buying paperbacks during the pandemic. I have over 12,000 paperbacks, so my wants list is small, and I have seen a huge rise in interest and the cost of 1970 paperbacks, which is my era of interest. One of the things I most enjoyed about paperback collecting was how cheap and accessible it was, and that has diminished materially in the last year. My passion for paperbacks has been replaced by a passion for British comics, and the war pocket books in particular. You might be able to see them on the grey shelves, which are from my home office. I've gone from owning none to several thousand in a year, mainly through bulk buys at low prices. I won't move on all my paperbacks in the same manner that I moved on my fanzine collection, a decision I have regretted since, but I can see me whittling them down by removing books that I own multiple editions of, or in genres that don't especially interest me, such as SF. And Jules, who is doing such a wonderful job with his videos, means I won't ever totally drift away from paperbacks for too long. Well, thank you very much for that, Justin. I can certainly sympathise with certainly the cost of certain era vintage paperbacks. Just looking at my eBay videos recently, the 70s in particular is red hot. Anyway, we'll take a pause from the collections there to thank my Patreon and channel membership supporters. Okay then, so collection number 12 is from Danny Smith, who says, "Hello, my name is Danny Smith and I'm from the States. So I'm a lifelong Star Trek fan, and I first started collecting Star Trek novels when I was around 14. I'm 29 now. Once I got my own apartment, I found I had a spare room available that could house my collection and my office workspace. I currently have 286 Star Trek novels, including the original James Blish novelizations, the numbered series books, and the current Trek novelverse. As my collection grew, I had a friend help me put up wall-mounted shelves around a good portion of the room so I could continue to display the novels in timeline order. I have a spreadsheet I've created where I list the novels in chronological order, book condition, approximate value, and to help me keep track of what I have and which versions I own. I've continually tinkered with the timeline order and narrowed it down thanks to research notes from multiple sites and fellow collectors to what I feel is the most accurate order possible. I've seen people do that on the Doctor Who in actual fact. It's quite a good way of doing it. I've also cut in the Eagle Moss XL models of the Enterprise on my bookshelves at the spot in the timeline where they first appear. I also have some non-Enterprise models, the Defiant and Voyager, slotted into the timeline where I could. Likewise, I have the existing Star Trek Mirror Universe novels and Kelvin Universe books alongside their respective ships. My rarest, most valuable novel is probably Deep Space Nine number 27, A Stitch in Time by Garak actor Andrew Robinson. I've also got an extensive collection of Star Trek reference books and blueprints. I'll include photos of that as well. If you'd like any other photos, close-ups or specifics, then please let me know. Well, I think that was fine, to be honest. He says, "I do love your channel and always listen to you, especially your Trek-related episodes when I'm working on my own collection." Well, thank you for that. Brilliant. A really, really nicely displayed collection. Now, collection number 13 is Michael Cocksedge. So, Michael says, "I saw your video regarding other book collections and thought I would show you a snippet of mine. So, I'm based in Letchworth Garden City in Herefordshire. I collect mainly US Digest books and bought my first back in 1995 on a trip to Memphis in a junk warehouse. It was Wayward Nurse by Norman Bly, and I thought it was cool as it was larger than a paperback and the artwork by Rudolf Bolarski was just brilliant. I started collecting Rockabilly 45 records first, and this was something I did right through the 80s and 90s. But when the book bug got me, I switched and am still collecting today. But I rarely find any digest anymore, as I pretty much have them all. I didn't buy another digest until the early 2000s when I started on eBay, and I was picking them up dirt cheap at the time and was learning all the time. I have nearly 1,000 digest books in total. I also collect Badger, Supernatural and SF, and when I find them, UK paperbacks from the early 50s by Ben Sarto, Hans Vogel and the others of that type, gangster, crime, that sort of thing, with all that great artwork. I have all the Falcon books, all the Rainbows, all the exotics and nearly all the ecstasy novels. Also have included a photo of some of my other big hitters in the drug department bookwise. I also collect quarter books, Venus, Uni, Phantom, US and Australian, Original, Stallion, Croydon, Intimate, Carnival and Cameo. Oh, brilliant, and really, once again, really nicely displayed, Michael. They're fantastic. So collection number 14, and the last that we're going to look at today, is from Andrew Greenwood. Now Andrew says, I love your videos and very much share your fascination with ogling the book collections of others. It was one of the few positives of the national lockdowns, with celebrities showing off their bookshelves in the background of their video interviews. My own, much cherished book collection spans various genres, reflecting my passions for, in no particular order, history, politics, religion, classic English literature, world wars, crime, murder, mystery, TV and film, sport, comedy and more besides. For fiction, I love Shakespeare. I have battered but beloved American first edition set from 1795. Dickens, check out 2 of the earliest known dust jackets on a Dickens book. And G.K. Chesterton, I have a book he signed as Giping Gilbert to his good friend Francis Stenthal. He says Agatha Christie, plus the complete Poirot series written lately by Sophie Hannah, all signed first, and Norman Mailer, not least the signed first UK edition of his Pulitzer Prize winning novel The Executioner's Song. But I still buzz off some of the books I grew up with, like the Harry Potter books, first printing paperback set, except Philosopher's Stone, and audio cassettes, an early limited edition set signed by J.K. Rowling, Watership Down, first illustrated edition, and a lovely later set of Lord of the Rings in the dust jackets designed originally conceived by Tolkien. In non-fiction, I love Martin Gilbert's works, many of which I have signed. He is such a brilliant and reliable historian. His epic biography of Winston Churchill is definitive. I greatly admire the writings of William Hazlitt. I have his criticisms on Shakespeare's plays and his biography of Napoleon in original drab boards. T. Lawrence, his beautiful first trade edition of Seven Pillars, I've got that myself. Lloyd George, his Revolutionary People's Budget in rare speech pamphlet and book. And more recently, Peter Ackroyd, his biography of London is, I think, a modern masterpiece. However, the absolute shining light of my collection is my hero Churchill. Sir Winston is perhaps the most fascinating, brilliant and influential character to grace the earth in the past millennium, and his writing, for which he won the Nobel Prize in Literature, is quite remarkable. I challenge anyone to read my early life and thoughts and adventures and be anything other than charmed into exploring his quite brilliant works. I've been collecting his books for 5 years now, and have all his works in first edition, first printing, apart from a few of his outrageously rare early speeches that were published in book form. I also have pretty much everything written about him. I can't choose my favourite book though. Is it his first, The Malakand Field Force from 1897, or London to Ladysmith from 1900, originally owned by Arnold Hills, the founder of West Ham United FC? His biographer of his father, in dust jacket, perhaps Marlborough, about his great ancestor and signed by his daughter, or a presentation set of his peerless war speeches. I'm yet to read all my books, cover to cover, but where there's a will, there's a way. I'll send you some photos of my bookshelves in case you might want to feature any of the collection on your outstanding channel. Well, thank you very much for that, Andrew. I too am a Churchill fan and collector, but I've got nowhere near the amount of books that you've got. But I very much am a fan of Churchill's history of the Second World War, and I've read that one straight through 3 times now, and each time I take something else from one of the 6 volumes. It's just fantastic. So there you go. I hope you have enjoyed looking through the incredible collections that we've seen today. And once again, I do encourage you to send some photos of your own collections in, be it large or small, and I'll feature them next time. Until then, thanks very much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon. Bye.